Hello everyone, it's Esther. It's been a while. I look around at religions these days, at the horrific things being done in the name of God, and I think to myself, we may have forgotten our humanity. Wars are fought, fathers, mothers, children sacrificed every day. People hate each other over religious or political ideals. I look at myself in the mirror and wonder how I could have possibly shunned my own beloved mother while under the spell of a religious theology. What would make folks, me included, take such extreme actions, even against people we claim to love? I'm truly a bookish person. When I read books, including the Bible, I can't help wondering what is the tipping point for us as cultures and as individuals to forget our humanity so easily. It seems that no one behaves quite so badly as those who perform their evil deeds while believing their God would wish it to be so. Is it because of this, for lack of a better description, forgetfulness, that some humans were able to elevate themselves over their neighbors, over their peers, to the point of worshipful domination? I recently read a book called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. The subject of gods and goddesses is being researched in academia now. Much new light is being shone on the subject of matrilineal cultures occurring thousands of years before Babylon. Personally, I'm intrigued about the subject. I've been reading up on the goddesses for many years already. It seems my latest research is bringing the years of collecting disparate parts of information all together for me. It's an exciting time, really. Now that I'm free of religion, I read all kinds of books that intrigue me. Especially am I attracted to religious origins documented in archaeological and cultural findings. I'm realizing that this can be an accurate way of discovering the earliest beginnings of cultures, practices of worship, ancient and not so ancient traditions, and dogma. During the Neolithic Age, 6500 to 5000 BC, the sexual act was considered to be sacred, and the goddess was revered as the patron deity of sexual love. Without moralizing, women who worked at the temple were known as kadishtu, translated sanctified women or holy women. Sexual customs may have been viewed as a type of symbolic magic to invoke fertility in cattle, vegetation, and humans. According to Merlin Stone, the concept of reproduction was pictorially explained in a gray stone plaque discovered in the Neolithic shrine of the goddess at Katal, Huyuk, which is in Turkey, carved some 8,000 years ago. One side of the relief depicts the bodies of two lovers in a close embrace, the other side a woman holding an infant. All told, my research led me back in time as early as 25,000 BC, as Maria Gimbutas, the language of the goddesses, describes. She explains why her study in archaeomythology may prove to be a trustworthy path of research, since it includes 3 fields: archaeology, comparative mythology, and folklore. She found that the 3 fields of study came together rather well chronologically. Archaeologists by themselves mostly disregard mythology and folklore treasures. It seems archaeologists disregard the historical path that folklore artifacts produce, yet which presents a clear, easy-to-follow timeline via symbols. Interestingly, this symbolic system represents cyclical rather than linear time. Cyclical time reflects nature more accurately. Furthermore, in earliest recorded time, symbols carried entirely different meanings than with what we are presented now. Ms. Gimbutas describes in her introduction to the book, this symbolic system represents cyclical, not linear mythical time. In art, this is manifested by the signs of dynamic motion, whirling and twisting spirals, winding and coiling snakes, circles, crescents, horns, sprouting seeds and shoots. The snake was a symbol of life energy and regeneration, the most benevolent, not an evil creature. Black did not mean death or the underworld. It was the color of fertility, rich soil, the womb of the goddess, where life begins. White, on the other hand, was the color of death, of bones, the opposite of the Indo-European system. Unfortunately, modern times have often seen the sacred symbols hijacked by corporations with evil intent. The Jehovah's Witnesses Watchtower Corporation clearly uses a system of inversion to deceive and control its members. I posted a link below about that if you're interested in looking a little deeper. In view of the new information I've gleaned regarding matrilineal cultures in existence many millennia BC, before the Yahweh character came along, I'm looking at scriptures in an entirely different light. I'm opening myself to new ideas. All the years in the Watchtower religion, I only heard about the singular Almighty God myth. It's a myth. Until I woke up to the atrocities done in the name of God. The singular new idea of relevance to me is that I don't believe the Bible to be historically accurate. Yes, it may have some threads of historical value, and it must if it is to be believed at all. Jacquetta Hawkes talks about the dawn of the gods in her 1968 books when she writes about the northern invaders. On no subject have authorities differed so completely or with greater lack of objectivity than on the origins of these cultures. The reason for this partisanship lies in the one thing the authorities are agreed upon, that the battle axe cultures represent the roots of the Indo-European speaking peoples. What can be said with some certainty is that the battle axe people had a large ethnic, social, and cultural inheritance from the hunter-fisherers of the forest cultures. Though it may not always or everywhere have been so, this character came in time to be dominantly pastoral, patriarchal, warlike, and expansive. The invasion by the northern groups were not a single major event, but rather a series of migrations arriving in waves and spanning a period of up to 3,000 years, and it began around 2400 BC. It appears these groups brought with them the Yahweh character. They were patriarchal groups. Most historians and archaeologists agree with this view based on literature and surviving artifacts. So, is the goddess culture myth, or is it real? Let's look a little deeper. There is much discord in the research regarding dates and events surrounding the era of the goddess. Understandably so, since much about the goddess religion has been relegated to the status of myth. Also, perhaps it is another case of conquering nations rewriting the history as is known to occur. Even so, the religion of the goddess cannot be discounted because so much has been unearthed in recent decades, proving it is more than a theory. I can clearly see that in the period artifacts, carvings, figurines, etc., I lend credibility to Merlin's stones and Maria Gimbutas's work, simply because these researchers revealed stories about the goddesses that other researchers carefully avoided. I have read other goddess books that won't reveal how badly the women known as the goddess, the high priestess, or queen of heaven behaved. I mean, for that matter, we could ask, are the Bible stories credible? Further on the subject of biblical events, I watched a video enacting a Bible character named King Josiah. And this was a Josiah video in which it was smashing artifacts to rid the land of the goddess culture. It was shown at the Love Never Fails 2019 Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. I took a screenshot from John Cedars' YouTube channel, and you can look right after 47 minutes and 20 seconds into the video what I'm talking about. This King Josiah character violently destroyed what he considered an idolatrous culture of his day. While neither the Jehovah's Witnesses religion or the Bible specify these worshippers of Yahweh were tearing down the goddess culture using sledgehammers, it can be seen in this video that I mentioned in the critique video of John Cedars where the soldiers attacked the women. They were attacking women in that video. Their goal was to destroy every last vestige of the goddess religion and replace it with Yahweh's Levitical, patriarchal rule. Prove me wrong. Lloyd Evans, the content creator, doesn't make this claim. It's simply my own observation. Much so-called historical detail in the Bible has been rearranged by the incoming patriarchs to suit their own agenda. It seems even the agenda can vary depending on the religion. Because the King Josiah account is located in the Bible, we can't really determine a timeline. The Bible is full of myth, made-up stories that cannot be proven historically. Rewriting the creation story is another example of why you can't believe the Bible. It's not worth the paper it's written on. If you were raised in a patriarchal religion like the Jehovah's Witnesses, you likely heard some version of the Adam and Eve myth. Adam and Eve myth. I call it a myth because it wants us to believe that no woman was involved in the creation of the first couple. That flies in the face of what we know about how life is really created. Yet again, here's another example of reasoning in the name of God. So we have to believe it. In other words, if God says it, then it must be true, even if these gods were mere men. And they were. All of these gods were dead. And they were deified after that point, after they were dead. Now, how can they be a god if they are dead? Since the fig tree was regarded in female cultures as a gift given by the goddess, it was to be hated by the men who wished to destroy her. In that case, there might be nothing quite so effective as including a fig leaf in their revised creation story. And if you were to eat of the fig tree standing by each goddess altar where sacred sex took place, You were declared pagan by these patriarchs, along with the goddess customs, all the rest of them. Sex had now been declared somehow shameful, as I'll go into more detail in another story. Better yet, you may wish to read Merlin Stone's book yourself. It contains a wealth of knowledge about which we apparently are not otherwise entitled to access by our patriarchal system today. Were there harms in the matriarchal culture? Certainly, there is no reason for extreme actions that harm humanity. However, women, like men, may have started out honorably, but somewhere along the way the human ego interfered. It led women to forgetting their humanity and adopt a position of rulership over other women and also men. At some point, the practice of male castration became a thing, especially if the males were finished being a consort or lover of the queen goddess. Why? Here's Ms. Stone's explanation. The Anatolian myth of the goddess Inara revealed that once a man slept with the goddess, presumably the high priestess, he might never again sleep with another woman for fear that he would transfer the sacred powers of the goddess to her. That's a superstition, if you ask me. One Attis legend explained his voluntary castration as a reaction to his fear of being unfaithful to the goddess. If the consort was not allowed to have sexual relations with anyone after he had been with the high priestess, castration may have been the one solution that at first allowed him to remain alive. Apparently Osiris, Uranus, and Attis were at the receiving end of such brutal treatment, even if self-induced, just to prolong their own lives after the goddess was finished with them. Reference to eunuch priests can be found in ancient Sumer, Babylon, Canaan, Anatolia, and other areas. After castration, the eunuch males donned female clothing as if to deny their masculinity. That action would assure the female ruler that no child born could possibly be theirs, the men. Can't be my baby. I'm castrated. Eunuch priests are still in existence today under patriarchal rule, maybe for different reasons. Nevertheless, it seems males are following in the footsteps of the goddesses for cruelty and control over others. So how did men gain the upper hand over the goddess cultures? While reading about the dominance of a goddess culture and religion, I began to wonder how it was possible for humanity to transition to the right of divine kingship of the male deity. When I read about the abuses men underwent, I suspect that at some point the men must have wondered, how do we stop this oppression by the goddesses? It appears the males devised a plan to bring down the female cultures, and males would have the upper hand, having the advantage of strength. Women are much more the nurturers. Men were protectors. In this case, they protected their own interests in dominating the women. Perhaps the aforementioned video about King Josiah is an example of men protecting their own interests. Well, in my opinion, the matrilineal and patrilineal cultures were both an epic fail when you look at it deeper. In many ways, the matrilineal culture was just as archaic and hurtful as the patrilineal culture of today. One is no better or worse than the other because both systems were and still are out of balance with nature. Being in balance or out of balance with nature is my measuring rod of success or failure of religions and cultures. Simply put, my research has led me to realize that I, as a human being, is meant to be inherently self-sovereign. I don't need to give away my power to something or someone outside of myself. Both the god and goddess cultures demonstrate clearly the errors of such supreme being thinking. Sure, I could consult with someone more knowledgeable than myself in a specific area of study, but there is certainly no need for worship, to which both male and female cultures aspired. Could this obsession with godship be the reason for forgetting about our humanity? But there's the deity principle. How could both the matrilineal and patrilineal cultures get their subjects to worship them? That's where the god or goddess principle was enacted. If they could convince their subjects that God says, or the goddess said, then it became the law of the land. It became a case of spiritualizing the politics of the day. It became the stick to make people turn obedience into an act of worship. Fortunately for the power brokers and unfortunately for the common people, this deity principle worked. Anything could then be declared as truth if it was pronounced in the name of God. Where the goddesses once had a self-perpetuating system, that has now been replaced by the males. It too is self-perpetuating in that the prejudices and choices of the goddesses have been hijacked by the patrilineal culture. Men are now teaching that their wishes for worship, which include paying of taxes, the offerings of child rape, and blood sacrifice, must be accommodated to appease the god. The men now define what "in the name of God" means. Even their conquered predecessors had no choice but to comply. Now it is the woman that must be subservient to the male, whether in marriage, the office, in the JW congregations where women have absolutely no acknowledgement. Self-perpetuating indeed. Patriarchy is that. In the name of God in Bible times, in order to achieve their position of prominence in a male-dominated culture, the priests convinced themselves that their followers, that sex, the very means of procreating new life, was immoral. It was declared the original sin in some religions. It was implied in others. This new male religion of the Bible regarded the process of conception as shameful and sinful. Sex became an act to be hidden or only allowed in marriage, which is something else that religion made up. The Adam and Eve characters now had to cover themselves with that infamous fig leaf. A great modern-day example of male dominance is the tyranny of the Jehovah's Witnesses religion. Females are now encouraged to be respectful and understanding, while yielding to their rapist. How's that for a patriarchal rule in the name of God? It is worth mentioning that rape isn't about sex only. More often than not, it is also about power over another. In this case, the power of the patrilineal culture of the Watchtower Corporation. I'll put a link below. Since the overthrow of the goddess culture, we are being molded to fit into the narrow and peculiar needs of this patrilineal society. Of interest is that The modern day gods readily found in political, corporate, and religious systems elevate themselves above the law of which the common people must abide. Is it too late for a healthy shift? Maybe we can still learn something from that lust for power over people. I can see that both the female and male cultures turned away from service to community to one of self-serving status at some point. Self-serving status. When the desire for God or goddess status was realized, the rulers of the day became unbalanced in themselves, which in turn unbalanced the family, the community, and the entire culture. It seems that matrilineal cultures existed up till the time that Babylonian male culture gained power. At that time, the men rose against the women because of a desire to make a great name for themselves, if you recall in the Tower of Babel. Even the Bible admits to that greed for power. The men attempted to build a tower into the heavens, according to Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9. But as the tower got taller and taller, it became apparent that it was a ridiculous idea. The building project became next to impossible to access the heights these men desired. Even at its highest, there was still no heaven in sight. These men were wearing themselves out. The entire project began to feel futile. Instead of making themselves feel great, the monstrosity they struggled with every day made them feel smaller and less significant. Their grandiose idea became a humiliation. The people were losing hope in the concept of accessing heaven by sheer height alone. All the sacrificing of children and whatever else was demanded of these men yielded no results. Personally, I don't believe that some imaginary god confused the language to disperse the men. The abandonment of the project happened much more naturally. I mean, seriously, how could these men be so shallow to think they could access heaven? If heaven is even real. Was it another case of the "in the name of God," of which the men attempted to convince the people was real? What can we learn from that? Well, gradually the men in Babylon left off building their sky city. Their failure proved embarrassing, and the men decided it was best to put distance between them and their grand idol. Their coveted building project came to a standstill. Maybe it was then they decided to conquer linearly instead of vertically. They didn't seem to learn that human bodies are here on the earth to accept their humanness and their limitations that a human flesh suit offers. They forgot their humanity as they continued to strive for godship status. Still, humans are striving for godship via a global movement to conquer the planet now. All their plans are in place and have been for several centuries now, even if they can't all agree on every detail. Why not instead live as a human being with integrity? Why not learn to love our humanity? Let's get grounded in our humanity. Let's relish this life as an earthling. For me, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I don't want to miss this. Personally, I don't want to mess up either by getting greedy for power. How about you?